Alright, boys. It's a midnight rant from your boy. It's very late. Past midnight. Won't tell you how late. But, I felt inspired. Don't know why, or don't know what about, but I just kinda did. Just kinda wanted to play a video game and talk to the microphone. Um, and mainly I want to talk about, um, the 5700 XT again, which is something I have done already, but I want to talk about it again because it makes me sad. Because for the first time in a couple of months, if I got some more issues on it, and it's crashed on me before, and it's been buggy with whatever before, but it crashed again, and it's just sad every time that card crashes on me. It's sad because I have somewhat of an emotional connection to any piece of hardware I'm using, whether it's a phone or a graphics card or a CPU, regardless of how practical or impractical it may be. And I care a lot about the 5700 XT. Like, for me, that was a card that I spent a lot of money on because I kind of believed in the AMD dream, in a sense. I saw and experienced the success with Ryzen. I thought, hey, I'll give RDNA Navi a chance. And it sucked to genuinely just get bitten back by that and just, you know, uh, instead of being faced with, or instead of being rewarded with the promised performance, I kind of got the worst end of it, where it's like, nope, you just get faulty drivers and constant crashes and uncertainty about whether your hardware's messed up or whether AMD just messed up the software again, and that's pretty lame. And it's making me wonder because there's a lot of hype around the 6000 series, the Navi 2, or the Navi, the big Navi stuff, 6800, 6800 XT, 6900 XT, and they look great. And the smart access memory stuff looks great, but I'm afraid that they will be review bait, just like the 5700 XT was. That they'll look great on a spec sheet, on a chart from Linus Tech Tips or whoever, and then someone will buy it and they'll put it in their system, and it will just break, and it'll black screen or crash or have issues with FreeSync or any number of things that have already happened with the 5000 series that could totally just happen on the 6000 series. I've seen 5000 series GPUs show up at work. Um, 5600 XT one time. I think I saw a 5700 that was acting up. Like, this is. I've seen more issues with these cards than I've ever seen on Nvidia, and it's hard to be confident that they won't just disappoint me again. And so I wasn't planning on buying a new graphics card anyway, and I still am not, because GPUs are expensive, and the 5700 XT, when it does work, is still way more performance than I need for 1080p. Um, but if I was looking for a new GPU, or when I do look for a new GPU, it's going to be a real consideration. Like, I'm going to kind of grow up a little bit, I guess, and stop just looking at the blank numbers or whatever, and I'm going to actually have to consider real performance, or real stability, instead of just performance. And that sucks. I wish stability wasn't even part of the conversation, because when stability is part of the conversation, it means that it's not a good thing. If you have to talk about stability, it's because there is a lack of stability. That's why when you talk about iPhones and stuff like that, you're not talking about how stable the iPhone is or how well the App Store is. Like, you only talk about that when there's been a bad software update, which usually doesn't last too long, or during a beta period, which again doesn't last too long because beta software isn't release software, and so obviously it's going to be buggy. And so the fact that stability is even uh, is even a main topic of discussion for AMD is hard to to deal with, because it hasn't been a major topic of discussion for Ryzen for a long time. It's pretty well known that Ryzen has uh, a better memory controller than Intel's latest offerings. It's pretty well known that Ryzen's entire stack is really good at overclocking um, on really cheap processors that aren't binned all that well, and they still overclock really well. You can still get a first gen Ryzen 3 1200, the base model, lowest end Ryzen 3, 4 cores, 4 threads, and you can overclock it pretty well, and you can you can squeeze out like 10% more performance out of it in any workload that you're Cinebench R15, Cinebench R20, whatever you're trying to do with it, you can do it. And that's and I thought that that would translate to RDNA, and it just kind of didn't. And so what I'm expecting from RDNA 2, if RDNA 2 is anything like RDNA, we're gonna see some great reviews from all the big name YouTubers and all the all the Linuses and the Gamers Nexuses and all that, and the numbers are gonna be great. Um, and then they're gonna get into the hands of consumers if they get into the hands of consumers because of supply shortages. Um, and they're gonna have power issues and they're gonna have crashing issues and all that stuff. I mean, like, it's funny because the last time the 5700 XT was unstable for me, it was just kind of like, screw you, just gonna crash. And this time when it was unstable, it actually kind of knew that it was being unstable. It would tell me that in the Radeon driver, it would give you a notification saying that it had to reset some Wattman settings. And I don't mess with Wattman because I know Wattman sucks. MSI Afterburner is way better than Wattman at frequency and voltage sliders, basically, because Wattman, just like a lot of the Radeon stuff, is really buggy. And just straight up didn't work for the first like 3 months of the 5000 series launch, so that was cool. But so I don't mess with Wattman. So the fact that I had to reset settings that I hadn't really changed, except for like maybe like the auto OC slider that usually turns on by itself when you hit like the gamer profile. Um, yeah, it's just it's like, really, you had to fix something that I didn't even do. And it didn't fix it. I messed with a ton of settings and it just didn't work. And so once again, just like in my original video, the 980 Ti is back in my system, and it's because there's something I can expect from my 980 Ti, and that's stability, at least in the drivers. Now, the 980 Ti is not a perfect card. The 980 Ti is known, and just the Maxwell series in general, but 980s, 980 Ti's are known for just blowing up one of their VRMs at any given point, and at some point, a VRM will blow up, um, or um, or a controller or something will blow up, and that'll be it. Because the 980 Ti, while a great card, and while I got it for basically no cost, it's still a pretty unremarkable. Like, it doesn't have any sentimental value to me the way the 5700 XT does, because I didn't have to work for it, and it's not a design I'm particularly fond of. So, yeah, but so in general, I don't know what I would do if I was. Thankfully, I'm not. But if I was a prospective GPU buyer in late 2020, looking at the Ampere and RDNA 2 stuff, I genuinely don't know what I would pick. I think I would be really conflicted between um, stability and it's a certain level of expected performance and taking a chance on AMD again. Because that's another thing, is that you're taking a chance on AMD not just for um, general stability, but you're taking a chance on AMD for how much they've grown in terms of like feature sets. So you're taking a chance with the 6000 series. Theoretically, if you end up pairing it with 5000 series Ryzen processors, you're taking a chance on smart access memory. You're taking a chance on rage mode, which is hilarious. But like, yeah, you're taking a chance on a lot of driver features that are not guaranteed to work very well. Period. And when if they do work, they're not guaranteed to work um, uh, continuously well or work in a way that's meaningful to performance or to to anything. So yeah, it's a rough decision. Thankfully, like I said, I'm not really looking for that. So I get to just sort of sit here with my 980 Ti, and thankfully I have more hardware. You know, there's a lot of people that just get downright screwed, that have to mess with their cards for like days straight because they have no other alternative. Thankfully, I have an alternative that's not significantly slow enough to make me you feel like it's a downgrade. Like I lose a couple FPS in a couple of games, but like a lot of the games I play have to be frame capped anyway. We're talking like Fallout or Dark Souls or any of that stuff. All those games get capped at 60, and the 980 Ti can pull off 60 FPS really easily in titles like that. Not to mention emulation performance, like what you're seeing right now, is still fantastic on the 980 Ti. Um, right now, I'm using the software emulator or the software visuals on this emulator because the OpenGL implementation is not perfect and there's a lot of flickering, but I'm certain OpenGL performance is solid because it's an NVIDIA card. So yeah, just 5700 XT is frustrating, and I'm sad about it because it shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't have to be dealing with this, but it's all right. I understand that. It's what I get for being an early adopter, and that's something I'm learning more and more. The whole never pre-order thing, it's real, man. Really, if you don't want to get screwed by something new, the easiest solution is just don't order it. Don't put a dime towards anything experimental if you really don't want it to screw you. Um, and yeah, which is kind of funny of me to say for my upcoming video, and I'll kind of sneak peek my upcoming video. So my last video was talking about how I'm conflicted on a purchase of the iPhone 12 mini because the iPhone 12 mini, um, regardless of its features and whatever, shows once again Apple's reluctance to, or not even just reluctance, shows Apple's outright uh, efforts to stop repairability on their devices, and that was hard for me to swallow as a repair person and as someone with a level head on my shoulders. The problem, though, is that I'm also very flawed. I am not. I'm, I was gonna title the video, and I probably still will because I think it's a decent title. I was gonna title the video I'm gonna make in like a week or two. Uh, do as I say, not as I do, because I still plan on putting in my order for an iPhone 12 mini, and I'll go into that reason a little bit more when I actually get the phone and I actually make the video. Um, but yeah, I mean, uh, it's gonna happen. I have some thoughts, and I'm sure I'll have more once I actually have the phone in my hands. I already have the case and the screen protector. I ordered them in advance because I want it to last as long as it will last on its own. Forget repairability. I'd really rather not crack the front or back glass or crack the camera lenses or anything and deal with the unrepairable phone that I'm complaining so much about. But no, the dimensions of the case and everything look pretty good. I'm really just looking for a smaller phone, so it makes sense. The sides are flat, so it's a little bit easier to grip. All that. So yeah, I'll talk about that more in detail once the phone's actually here. Um, and yeah, I mean, in general, I think there's something else I wanted to talk about. I'm very tired. Um, yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this emulator. Like, this emulator is pretty solid. If you don't know what this is, I'm playing Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass on the Melon DS emulator. Interesting thing about Nintendo DS emulation is it was actually really stagnant for a long time. The only emulator that existed was one. I don't really know how to pronounce the name, so I'm not going to say it. But it was one that this dude was kind of developing on the side, and there hadn't been a stable build since 2015. He was working on nightly builds up until 2019. Nightly builds meaning like weekly experimental builds that he was just sort of compiling on his spare time. And somewhere around I think mid 2019 or late 2019, the site sort of stopped getting new updates, and the dude sort of went dark. And that's expected from an emulator that was so inactive. But it sucks because DS emulation didn't really have an alternative, and now it kind of does. So Melon DS is sort of what's supposed to step in and fill that gap. Melon DS is being developed by a completely different individual. Um, from the ground up. Melon DS tries to do a little bit more than the other DS emulator. Melon DS is trying to do, or has multiplayer function added for the Nintendo DS. It has DSi emulation, which there wasn't a DSi emulator that was of any note before this, to my knowledge. And it's pretty impressive to run DSi software, really, because there were only like 4 DSi cartridge games, but there were some DSi software that was pretty solid. Stuff like Legend of Zelda Four Swords, uh, the re-release on the eShop for the 25th anniversary stuff, or the 20th. I don't remember what anniversary, but yeah, it's pretty cool to see that stuff running on emulator. And yeah, in general, this emulator is already, I'd say, more accurate than the other DS emulator. The only problem with it is the OpenGL renderer. So the thing about the software renderer here is that it's a lot more accurate and a lot faster than the other emulators' software renderer. The problem is that because it's a software renderer, you can't really mess with it. You can throw some filters on that kind of blur everything, but I think it looks pretty bad when you do that. I think it's usually better when you force integer scaling, but on 3D games it doesn't really help. To get some real image quality, you have to render the games on a GPU, and so there is an OpenGL emulator, but like I mentioned, it's not complete, and so there's a lot of flickering in games like Phantom Hourglass. In the Pokemon games that use 3D, so Black and White, Black 2, White 2, the OpenGL emulator actually works really well, albeit with a tiny bit of flickering, just like a couple black spots. But in general, it's pretty impressive. It's just not done. So, and this emulator is definitely in beta. I think it started development late 2018, so it's a pretty new emulator, but it's already pretty sophisticated. Like full online functionality for DS games is not trivial, or multiplayer functions I should say, because the DS was not really like an online console. But yeah, I mean, pretty impressive stuff. And like I said, it runs really well. There's actually an emulator, a DS emulator on iOS on iPhones, um, made by this dude Riley Testut, who makes another app called the Build Store, or the Alt Store. And the Alt Store, what the Alt Store does is it lets you sideload apps um, onto iPhones using a loophole in Apple's developer like settings. So basically, Apple will let you upload, or rather download, apps that you yourself are working on to your iPhone or iDevice for a limited amount of time as a non-developer. Because you can pay for their developer account and you'll get infinite access or whatever, but as a non-developer, they still let you do it on your personal devices. They just put a week time limit on the individual app license. And so what Riley Tustin has done with the Alt Store is he's made it so that he uses that 1 week license to get a bunch of side-loaded apps onto your phone, and then and it's tied to a PC. But using the Alt server on the PC, it will refresh that week long timer, so that theoretically, so long as you have your device connected to the same network as your PC and the PC has the server running in the background, you technically never run out of time for your side-loaded apps. And it works decently well. The online functionality for that is, or the network functionality for that has been pretty shoddy for me personally, but I've been using the Alt Store for a while, and it's pretty good. But back to the emulator, Riley Testut, and aside from the Alt Store, also develops an emulator on iOS called Delta that he's able to distribute now through the Alt Store. That he had a hard time distributing before he created the Alt Store, which is why he created it. And that emulator is called Delta. And originally that emulator, because it goes back a little bit. Sorry, I'm ranty. It's midnight. Cut me some slack. Riley Testut originally created an emulator called GBA for iOS, which, as the name implies, emulates Game Boy Advance games on iOS. And it was the best Game Boy Advance emulator on iOS because I think there was another before it, but again, it was kind of crap. And it was really solid, but he wanted a more versatile single solution emulator that could do more than just Game Boy Advance, and he started working on Delta. Now, Delta originally was just made to be GBA for iOS with NES emulation or something like that, but I think now it has NES, SNES, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. And now it also has Nintendo DS as the newest edition. And the Nintendo DS emulator was originally running on a core based off of the original, OG DS emulator on PC, but now it's actually running on Melon, and with Melon, it's a lot more efficient. It works way more consistently, at least in my personal experience. The emulator is still, or Delta is still in beta development, and I think up until this month or maybe next month, Nintendo DS access was limited to Patreon supporters. But I'm a Patreon supporter, and I've been um, messing with the DS emulator for a little while. I haven't used it in a while, but I was using it on my iPhone 11, and it ran really well there. Obviously, A13 chews through that stuff. I doubt that it would run that smoothly on newer devices, or rather on older devices, but it's probably still pretty good. So yeah, but anyway, Melon DS, pretty impressive, pretty versatile. Only problem with Melon DS, big limitation, is that most emulators that run standalone and that last for a long time usually just run by themselves. They emulate the core functions of the console you're emulating. But the problem with Melon is that it's one of many emulators that actually requires a BIOS file for the DS, and that's where you sort of get into a moral gray area, I guess, with emulation. Like, the more you need from the console itself, the less it makes sense. And ideally, you own the console and games that you're emulating, right? I mean, I own multiple DSs, and I own a copy of Phantom Hourglass physically, so I don't feel bad about this. And I didn't personally feel bad about finding just a random BIOS file on the internet, but it's pretty annoying to have to find a BIOS file, and hopefully at some point they can transition Melon DS to not need a BIOS file, because it just makes it harder to just kind of plug and play. I personally think that because emulators are great for like goofing around on your computer. They're great for like I just want to play X or Y game from my childhood, or X or Y game that just came out at a higher resolution or a higher frame rate, um, or on a bigger screen or whatever, without jumping through too many hoops. But I think most importantly, emulators are really, really great for conservation. And the easier it is to just sort of plug and play an emulator, the better it is for conservation. So I think emulators like RPCS3 and CMU, so those are the PS3 and Wii U emulators. They're really great because at this point they're very plug and play. RPCS3, you can literally just load up a game, maybe change a graphical setting or two, and it'll just run. CMU, same thing, but with a little bit more effort. You can automatically download some graphics packs that let you upscale the game and stuff like that. Um, and they're pretty sophisticated. Like, they just sort of download and run. Like, you need C++ runtimes, of course, and the PS3 emulator needs a PS3 firmware. The difference with the PS3 emulator needing a PS3 firmware is that Sony actually officially distributes the PS3 firmware from their website for use on actual PS3s for recovery. So it's less than trivial to get PS3 firmware. Unlike DS firmware, where that was like a very tight-lipped thing. Um, and it's definitely not like something Nintendo wants you just sort of finding on your own. Um, so yeah, but yeah, in general, Melon's great. I'm just gushing about Melon and talking about emulators too much at this point. So, but yeah, I mean, it feels pretty good to just sort of uh, talk. I was very tired, but I'm unable to sleep, and it's nice to just sort of play a game and talk. And I think this is a little bit more visually interesting than just me sort of talking at you with a blank browser window, because that can only be so interesting. At least here, you can tune me out and just watch the gameplay, even if I pause or whatever, or if I'm just generally bad at the gameplay. I mean, I am playing this with a mouse. This game was made for touch input with a stylus. Like, it's not perfect, but it's pretty alright. Um, but yeah, I think I should probably end the rant here, considering I don't have much more to talk about. Nothing really remarkable to say anymore. And if you sat all the way through this, I've most certainly wasted your time. If you have sat through this, thank you very much for listening to me, especially at this sleep-deprived state. I'm usually not up for making stuff when I'm this tired, but I don't know. I just sort of felt like there were some things I just wanted to say them. So yeah, I mean, thank you for listening. And I will follow up with that iPhone 12 video very soon. And I think you'll enjoy that one a lot more than this. All right, I'll talk to you later.